Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi, and we've got two 30-minute segments in front of you tonight. The first segment is the Matthew 9:14 through 17. Are Judaism and Christianity incompatible with one another? Or the short working title is Judaism v. Christianity. And the second 30-minute segment is given over to an apologetic work known as Exploring the Shema, discussions on the issues of Trinity, where we've been having this ongoing discussion. It's going on, it'll go on 3 years. It'll hit 3 years this year, I think this fall, if I can drag it out. But we're actually near the very end. We're working our way through a section on who or what is the Holy Spirit, and we've been looking at verses that are related to the Holy Spirit, just scriptural passages that we brought up in section 2 or paper 2 of this three-part study. So if you can make it for that, that would be great. But otherwise, let's jump right back into our Matthew study. If you can see on my screen right now, I've got Matthew 9:14 through 17 pulled up. Remember, this particular passage with Yeshua's statements about fasting and about the patch and the garment and the wine and the wineskins. This particular parable shows up in Mark and in Luke. And the Luke reading is where we actually get the word parable. And a lot of detail shows up there. I might even bring that into our study one of these times. I'm pretty sure I will. I just won't do it tonight. But let me read the relevant section first. This is out of the ESV. You can just follow along on your screen. Starting in verse 14. Then the disciples of John came to him, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" Verse 15. And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast." Verse 16. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. And then the final verse, verse 17, neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed, but new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. I think I will read the Luke passage next week, because I just remembered some resources that I was working through and looking at this week. It has become aware to my attention as I'm reading through this over and over again and studying it, that there are two primary issues that we could look at this passage through, two primary methods of interacting with the passage. One of these methods we can call the allegorical version of looking at the passage, where we take the words that the master left us, and because we don't have explicit explanation, right? He doesn't explain to us exactly what he's meaning by these parables. We could then begin to allegorize or speculate what they mean and come up with assign some meanings to the words themselves. That's what I mean by allegories, kind of like turn a sermon into it. And that's one way that historic Christianity has interacted with these words. Another way that we could simply read this passage is to take it for its moral or ethical meaning and look at the primary message behind the anecdotes or the parables. Instead of allegorizing it, just kind of take it almost the exact opposite. Take it at face value and just see if there is a general overall kind of lesson that's being portrayed by the use of the mechanism of parable or something like that. And so I haven't really touched on what could possibly be simply the overall simplistic message. I've always been kind of hitting the allegory, because that's when you read Christian commentaries on this passage, most of them are going to jump into the allegory. And the allegory is this: if you take the wedding feast where Yeshua is trying to tell them, hey, the bridegroom is with you, why should you mourn? You take that along with the piece of unshrunk cloth on the old garment and the new wine and the old wineskins. Take all that together. The allegory is that Yeshua has finally arrived as the long-awaited Messiah. And that's the wedding feast part. And Yeshua is putting himself into that role as the bridegroom. And Israel is the bride in this wedding. and God, of course, is officiating it, God the Father, right? He's marrying off his son, and he's got a bride chosen for her, which obviously would be Israel, right? Matthew was written within the purview of kind of Jewish worldview, Jewish mindset, getting the Jewish people's attention. Mark, I think, is written from a Gentile perspective. Luke, I can't remember how Luke's perspective is, and then John, I think it's been said that John is written to prove that Jesus is the Messiah, or Jesus is divine, or the Son of God, Son of Man, those types of things. But when we're talking about Matthew, we definitely have a Jewish audience kind of in view, so it would make no sense for the wedding analogy or the wedding part of the parable to not include Israel, right? It would make really no sense to say that this is a wedding between the church and Jesus, even though that is the allegory or the metaphor that gets carried over as we read a little further into the New Testament. And if we keep going with that, and we start looking at the piece of unshrunk cloth and old garment, and then link that really directly with the old wine, the new wine and the old wineskins, Christian commentators have chosen to interpret this allegorically as definitely Yeshua has brought the promises of the Old Testament into focus, but with the purpose of actually radically undoing the commitment to keep the law of Moses or the Old Testament ways and things like that.